Here's an interesting story that it's kind of been making the rounds a little bit online, especially on Twitter. There's a LA Times article about it, this or that. But one of the artists, Eddie Johns, who's the artist behind Daft Punk's "One More Time" sample, he was seeking the royalties for source material, and a lot of news outlets, like in our opinion and stuff, were like incorrectly putting, "Oh, Daft Punk chipped a guy out of this," or that, and that was making a big rounds on the internet. And I was like, what do you mean they're what? And I read the whole thing.
So the full story, it started with a Los Angeles Times report that was originally for subscribers and then like unpaywalled. So like that leads to some of the confusion. There's like a comment to be made about media there, but that's neither here nor there.
That's a different conversation.
Yeah. Yes. But they were basically looking at the story of there's this guy named Eddie Johns who is one of the many, many unhoused people in Los Angeles. Eddie Johns wrote a song, More Spell on You, in the 70s. That, you know, like had a tune to it, had a beat to it, had a kind of a flow to it. And it was something that was like infectious and worked really nicely. He didn't make a lot of success off of that song and off that recording at the time. Like a lot of Black people in the 70s, like they got their chance to get in the recording studio. They felt great about it, but no one around them was actually working in their interests. And so they would oftentimes be signing away their recordings, all those artist rights, et cetera, to these companies that did nothing with them.
Yes.
Until you would have artists like Daft Punk who would discover these recordings in record stores somewhere.
Because they would literally go through hundreds and hundreds of vinyl records trying to find as if sound
just
that
like
they
the
wanted.
Perfect one.
Exactly.
And so they found the sample from Eddie Johns' song and then used it in One More Time. And so like it becomes a big hit. Daft Punk does. We went into large detail with the Daft Punk episode about
and how many samples they've used, and
but like more specifically
the art of it, and
Daft life and the way that Daft Punk was very specific about the music production, the business side of what they did.
Yes.
They were very clear in wanting to make sure that like everything was covered to the extent the best they could. You know, there were times where that was
hard.
Yeah, like Robot Rock is one particular example where it's a little bit rougher on the edges, but they did their diligence in making sure that Eddie Johns was paid. The issue, and where a lot of news outlets got this wrong, was that Eddie Johns wasn't paid not because of Daft Punk not going through the efforts to pay like the artist for doing that. It was because of the record label. It was because the record label ultimately, you know, did the usual, well, we don't know who owns this, and it's a different application for this, but long story short, there's money that got sent, and it didn't get to the right person, and it got sent to us. So supposedly we have it, but we're not going to do anything about it.
Exactly. And so this is the thing to like a clear sample. You have to go over to the label of that artist and then basically pay the label to get clearance to use that sample in like the layman's terms. And there's a lot more nuance to it, but that's kind of usually how it goes down into that. So you have to hunt down what label was released in this specific track and the specific song that you're trying to sample, who gets the royalties to that. So for Daft Punk, they did that, and I paid what they thought was the label and everything else for that sample, but it never got to the artist who made it, which really isn't Daft Punk's fault at that point, because they did everything they could in their power to do it, because legally they can't just go up to Eddie Johns and give him money directly, because then the label needs to get their share, because the label owns the rights to the music, and you can't do that because then you get sued by the label in doing that. So basically it's a whole quagmire of labels and the music industry as a whole, which we have railed about on time and time again.
Constantly on this podcast. To kind of like, not all these stories get like an ending, sort of. Usually it's like this happened, this is the way it is, we move on with life. But there's some sort of like conclusions to this. So on the one hand, I'll just say to our point on the media, like I noticed the Griot, which is part of NBC's like broad network of things, wrongly just like summarized the LA Times report and said that like Daft Punk didn't do their thing in like paying the artist properly. And so it's this reason why, like, and especially because it's like a Black publication, they kind of made it into like a racist sort of issue. Like, now I, the Black writer of this article, can no longer feel the same when my like 8-year-old niece listens to Daft Punk, knowing that like they screwed over this like Black homeless person. It's like
hold your horses and get to the whole situation first, and realize that it is not Daft Punk's fault. And you should always blast Daft Punk in your house.
Yeah, there's criticisms to the LA Times and paywall models, and those criticisms can be met with like the way journalism has been effectively like ruined down to like low profit margins. But I think the LA Times did a good job. And continuing from like their story, the French publishing company GM Musapiro acquired the rights in 1995 to Johns' song. And so John, apparently they were never able to get, what they're saying is they're never able to get in contact with Johns to pay out the royalties properly. Daft Punk's been paying them twice annually since One More Time came out, according to LA Times reporting.
For 20 years.
Yeah. So
twice a year, 20 years.
Apparently, because of the Times reporting, one of the company's founder is going to try to look to get in touch with Johns to make sure that money is ultimately reciprocated. But this only happened because this unhoused person happened to 40 years ago, or like 30 years before the song came out, write a song that was really big, made big by Daft Punk, and then 20 years later, a reporter decided to look into it. Most of the time, reporters don't look into these stories. Most of the time, the artists aren't this big, and so this happens very often. The music industry just
gets overlooked, and yeah, that happens a lot, and that happens a lot of samples and stuff because a lot of things with sound. I mean, that's why we have one of our favorite awards.
Yeah, the
Vanilla Ice Award, exactly, because there's a lot of tracks that people could make it sound similar, and then who gets the royalties to that, and there's a whole discrepancy of many different artists that has happened. You have name recognitions with like Lady A and stuff, and them and a bunch of others that have happened throughout us as a podcast, but throughout the music industry history as a whole. So
this is just definitely say that music industry sucks, and we're going to continue covering it like this because this keeps happening.